Okay, good evening, everyone. My name is Sean Boyce, and welcome to the Freehold Regional Board of Education's reorganization meeting. There's a few items of business that we're going to take care of right up front here. The first is to read the results of the election from November 2nd. So I'll walk through that now. For the Freehold Borough Representative, Harold Moses received 8,563 votes with 91 write-ins. Howell Township Representative, Mr. Peter Bruno, received 12,973 votes, and there were 283 write-ins. And for Manalapan Township Representative, Jamie Bruno received 7,878 votes. Mr. Adam Weiss received 3,323 votes, and there were 50 write-in candidates. So with those three members to be sworn in tonight, we're going to move right to that. So Mr. Bruno and Mrs. Bruno, I'll ask you to the podium individually. When you get here, to raise your right hand and read the oath of office. I have that right here in front of you. But before I call you up, Mr. Moses, also elected, will be sworn in at a later time. We attempted to connect with him. He wanted to be here via Zoom tonight, but that didn't work out. So Mr. Toscano, the board's attorney, will swear Mr. Moses in at a later time. So let me begin with Mr. Bruno. If you could come up, please, raise your right hand and read the oath of office.
I, Pete Bruno, solemnly swear to cover to affirm that I will support the Constitution of the United States and the Constitution of the State of New Jersey, that I will bear true faith and allegiance to the same and to the government established in the United States and the state, under the authority of the people. So help me God. I repeat this, Sean? Second. I, Pete Bruno, do solemnly swear that I possess the qualifications prescribed by law for the office of member of the Board of Education, that I have not disqualified or as a voter persuaded under RS 1941, nor disqualified due to conviction of a crime or offenses listed on the JSA 188-121, and that I will faithfully, impartially, and justly perform all the duties of the office according to the ability, so help me God.
Ready, you may take your seat at the table. Thank you. Mrs. Bruno, please join us at the podium.
I, Jamie Bruno, do solemnly swear or affirm that I will support the Constitution of the United States and the Constitution of the State of New Jersey, and that I will bear true faith and allegiance to the same and to the government established in the United States and to the state, under the authority of the people. So help me God. I, Jamie Bruno, do solemnly swear or affirm that I possess the qualifications prescribed by law for the office of member of a Board of Education, and that I do not disqualify as a voter pursuant to RS 19-4-1, nor disqualify due to conviction of a crime or offense listed in NJSA 18A-12-1, and that I will faithfully, impartially, and justly perform all the duties of that office according to the best of my ability. So help me God.
Thank you, Mrs. Bruno. You may take your seat at the table, and welcome. The next order of business, board, is to elect a president for the upcoming year of the Board of Education. So the process that we use for that is that I will open the floor for nominations, and anybody can nominate any member of the board. No second is needed. At such time that there are no other nominations apparent, I will ask for a motion to close the nominations, and if there is only one candidate put forward, I will instruct the board secretary to cast a unanimous ballot for that individual. If it is more than one individual, then then there's a process to go through from there. So at this time, I'd like to, yes.
We just need to do a roll call.
Oh, yes, you're correct, I'm sorry. Before I do all of that, let me do a roll call of the Board of Ed. Mrs. Capiello.
Here.
Mrs. Higley.
Here.
Mrs. Lavin. Mr. Messinger.
Here.
Mr. Moses. Mrs. Finelli.
Here.
Mrs. Bruno.
Here.
Mr. Parisi.
Here.
Mr. Bruno.
Here.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Toscano. Okay, so at this time, I'd like to open the floor for nominations for President of the Freehold Regional Board.
So I'd like to nominate Peter Bruno from Hal.
Thank you, Mr. Messinger. Seeing no further nominations, I will ask for a second on that motion, and the motion will be to close the nomination and a unanimous ballot be cast for Peter Bruno for the President of the Freehold Regional Board of Education. May I have a second?
Second.
Second, Mrs. Capiello, thank you. And now we'll do a roll call. Mrs. Capiello.
Yes.
Mrs. Higley.
Yes.
Mr. Messinger.
Yes.
Mrs. Finelli.
Yes.
Mrs. Bruno.
Yes.
Mr. Parisi.
Yes.
And Mr. Bruno.
Yes.
Congratulations, Mr. Bruno.
Thank you, members. I appreciate it. I'm going to work real hard again this year for you. Thank you. Can I get these mics on louder? Testing. Can you hear me okay back there?
It's loud.
Okay. The floor is now open for nominations for Vice President of the Board of Education to serve until the reorganization meeting next January. Members will be nominated. A second is not required. May I have motion to nominations for Vice President?
Ms. Capiello's got her hand up.
I nominate Mr. Parisi from Howell, please.
Any other nominations? And not seeing any other nominations, Mr. Boyce? Roll call.
So the motion that we'll need a second on is to close nominations and to cast a unanimous ballot for Mark Parisi for Vice President of the Freehold Regional Board of Education.
I'll second that.
Mr. Bruno. Very good. Mrs. Capiello.
Yes.
Mrs. Higley.
Yes.
Mr. Messinger.
Yes.
Mrs. Finelli.
Yes.
Mrs. Bruno.
Yes. Lavin.
Mr. Parisi.
Yes.
Mr. Bruno.
Yes.
Motion passes.
Mrs. Lavin.
Mrs. Lavin.
Lavin.
Mrs. Lavin is
Mrs.
here.
Lavin.
Kept saying it, but that's okay.
I want to thank my fellow board members for electing me vice president for the second year in a row. I appreciate your patience.
Thank you, Mr. Parisi.
Thank you, Mr. Parisi.
So this time I'd like to invite Mr. Toscano up to the microphone to do ethics training, annual requirement of the Board of Ed. Mr. Toscano.
Is it on mute?
Okay. I'm just looking for the share screen button real quick. I got it right in the middle, right on my face. Okay.
It says email, okay.
Okay, so good evening, everybody. At your spots, you will find our packet for this year. There's a cover sheet over the top.
As I would ask that we please sign this, return this to Mr. Boyce as the board secretary. This will signify that the board has had its annual School Ethics Act discussion as required. So just kind of starting real quickly, this will not replace your required mandatory training that the School Boards Association requires for all school board members, but this does satisfy our annual obligation to have a discussion. So just real quick, the goal of the School Ethics Act is to basically make sure that board members conduct themselves in a way that holds the respect and confidence of the public, and that you conduct yourselves in a manner that is in keeping with the public trust and does not create a justifiable impression on the public that that trust has been violated. The applicable code provision does require that every year we have a discussion about the School Ethics Act, and we've always done that here at the reorganization meeting. That's why I put a little picture too for you, that we ask you please to sign the cover sheet and return it, just in case there is any confusion. Okay, so real fast, from an overview perspective, the school board is the governing body of the school district. It is charged with high-level policy-making decisions. It is the only entity that can enter into contracts or other binding agreements. Its decision-making authority is limited. Board members do not administer the schools. And the board has a symbiotic relationship with the superintendent. Very candidly, nobody gets hired, fired, transferred, removed, or not removed without the recommendation of the superintendent and affirming action of the Board of Education. A big issue that's been coming up within the last couple of years is, can board members really take their hat off? Meaning, are there instances where you are no longer a board member or you are not acting as a board member? And we'll dive into that because that exception has been getting narrowed more and more. All of your conduct as board members is governed by the Code of Ethics, and I give you the statutory citation. So, if you care to follow along, underneath that form is a printout copy of all of the slides. I'm not going to read each one to you. I give this to you as a reference point, but I will highlight some of the key provisions. There are 10 provisions of the Ethics Act. I've kind of boiled them down into the way I summarize them. The first one is, I will uphold all laws and regulations of the state of New Jersey, the State Board of Ed. We just had 2 members sworn in. We heard the oath of office, the obligations to follow the rules. This one is kind of self-explanatory. On each one of these slides, you will see both the ethics provision, and then you will see underneath evidence of violation. This is what the Commissioner of Education has deemed will be a violation of a provision, so you kind of see what evidence would be, or what the School Ethics Commission would look for if there was a charge of a violation. So I also try to give, through some of the cases, some concrete examples as to how people violated the provision, so that it's not in a vacuum. If you see the letter C in front of a number, that means case. If you see the letter A in front, that means advisory opinion. And the reason why that is the School Ethics Commission, which is the administrative body that makes all determinations under the School Ethics Act, issues its decisions in one of 2 ways, either through an advisory opinion or through an actual case decision. So that's simply why you'll see an A and a C. So the first case is kind of entertaining. A board member violated the provision, meaning violated the rules and laws of the state, by trying to issue a rights notice to a district employee without following the procedures. Board members do not issue rights notices. That's an administrative function. That's for the administration to do. Another way in which this provision was violated, a board president violated the code when they didn't agree with an employee that was hired, proceeded to pick up the phone and call the person that was hired and tell them, yes, you were on the agenda, yes, the board voted, but I told the superintendent to take you off. He didn't listen to me, so I'm firing you now on the phone. It doesn't work. It doesn't work that way. So you can kind of see how that some of these are just silly fact patterns, but they are illustrative of the point that the specific provisions are trying to address. The second one is you're here for the educational welfare of the students. You're not here for any personal vendettas or personal grudges or personal scores to settle. You are here to make decisions in the educational welfare of the students. So, kind of entertainingly, how was this violated? Well, a board member violated this provision when they released an ethics complaint that they had filed against a fellow board member to the local media, which contained confidential information about the other board member's child. That's certainly not acting in the educational welfare of students. Here's a first advisory opinion dealing with conflicted members. This is, we'll talk a lot about members that are conflicted, but if you were to have a relative or immediate family member that worked here in the Freehold Regional High School District, you would not be able to be involved in any manner involving employment decision or evaluation regarding your relative, anyone that supervises your relative, anyone that supervises that supervisor, all the way up the chain of command to the superintendent. Number 3, 4, and 5 are really the big provisions. You will see they all kind of flow together. So the first is that board members limit their action to policy, planning, and appraisal. Those are a key phrase you'll kind of hear kind of over and over again. So this is where you see board members kind of veering out of the lane. So first example, the board members decided to conduct a site visit to assess a candidate for assistant superintendent position. That's not policy, planning, and appraisal. That's acting almost as an administrator. The second way this was violated. A board member violated this when they decided that they were going to set the criteria for the consulting firm. They were going to set the interview questions. They were going to set everything for the new superintendent, what they wanted. The problem is the board member was conflicted and was not allowed to participate in the search because they had a relative working in the district. So again, it's not limiting to policy, planning, and appraisal in that instance. So 3 is we limit our actions to policy, planning, and appraisal. 4 is we're not going to micromanage the schools, okay? Meaning it's not your responsibility to administer the schools, but to see that they are well run in conjunction with your fellow board members. So, how was this violated in the past? And again, let me just clarify in case there was any confusion. These cases are not cases that came out of Freehold Regional. These are cases from all around the state. So I just wanted to just clarify that. A board member was found to have violated this provision, again, no micromanaging, by directing the superintendent to allow a student to participate in a graduation ceremony. That's an administrative function. That is not a board function. Another way, a board member was found in violation when he decided to show up at a school unannounced, conduct an on-site visit without getting authority from the superintendent or the building principal, walked around, took pictures of open windows, then decided to have a press conference outside. Again, that's not, that's administering, that's conducting an investigation. It is not for board members to undertake those actions. That's considered micromanaging. And just for purposes of clarification, when a complaint is filed with the School Ethics Commission, there's 4 types of penalties that can be imposed. The first is the Ethics Commission, like us, follows progressive discipline. The first is a reprimand. Second is a censure. Third is a suspension. Fourth is removal. And it can be as severe as the facts are warranted. So I do try in these summaries to point out to you what the penalty was. So for example, the board member who showed up and decided to conduct the investigation, he was censured. The last point on here is something that really kind of exploded right around 2009, 2010, as the corporate world was really adopting exit interviews and really stressing that as a practice. Board members tried to bring that into the local school board. Well, the Ethics Commission made it very clear, board members are not permitted to participate in exit interviews. In fact, as you'll see later, board members are not allowed to sit in on interviews for potential candidates. The sole exception to that being the position of superintendent, because that is the only position that the Board of Education evaluates and supervises. Now, I don't mean to be negative, so I found this decision issued last year, and I thought it was a really good one because it illustrated how the process is supposed to work. So everything is no, no, no. Well, here's an instance where you had a board member who through the years had a child who played rec baseball. As they were going through, there was a particular parent of another child who was rather obnoxious and engaged in some conduct that was inappropriate at some of the baseball games. Well, the board member gets elected, gets appointed to the policy committee, and in conjunction with the other board members, develops a policy for the proper conduct at their high school baseball games. When the season comes around and the belligerent parent starts back up, he is then escorted off the property and not allowed to attend baseball games because of the implication of this new policy. Well, that person tried to file an ethics complaint and complain that the policy was directed and targeted at him because of an argument he and him and the board member had gotten into in prior years. And it was thrown out because it basically said, this is how the system is supposed to work. The board member worked, they developed the policy, and the administration implemented the policy. So I just like to throw this out as an example of kind of how it's supposed to be done. So 3 is policy planning appraisal, 4 is no micromanaging, 5 is no personal or private actions, meaning you recognize that authority rests with the board and that you won't make any private promises to compromise the board. We only act when we're in session. When we're not in session, we have no authority. It's as simple as that. Here's some, just kind of interesting. Board members violated this when they made a personal promise for a candidate to assistant superintendent. Okay? Basically promising somebody a job. You can't do that. That's making personal promises. Okay? Again, one of the more extreme examples, a case that came out 2 years ago, a board member was found in violation of making personal promises and engaging in inappropriate private action when they were stopped for a traffic stop. They then proceeded to insult the officer, called the request for their license a blank insult, threatened to make a call right now to the city council president, and then made some disparaging comments about the council president and the chief of police. Basically, the Ethics Commission found that the board member was trying to leverage her position as a board member to try to get out of a traffic ticket. Again, not appropriate. Number 6, no personal gain, meaning you're not here for the personal gain of yourself or any of your friends. So here's an example of kind of somebody coming in with a vendetta. A board member was elected. He was a previous employee of the district, was actually terminated by the superintendent, filed prior ethics charges against that superintendent, gets elected, and on the very first night that they were a board member, calls for a vote of no confidence in the superintendent. The Ethics Commission came down and said, well, you're not here for the right reasons. You're here for some sort of personal gain, i.e. revenge. So that board member was not only disciplined by the Ethics Commission, but they were also blocked from participating in any future votes or issues involving the superintendent's employment. Number 7, maintain confidentiality. This is a big one. As a board member, you are privy to information that the public is not, because you are their elected representatives on the board. You will receive private information related to students, employees, collective negotiations. So you have to maintain that confidentiality and protect it. So this is one that we're seeing pop up more and more recently. So for instance, a board member violated this provision of the code by deciding to go on social media and posting confidential information about a staff member for a school and telling the entire town that they were hospitalized for a medical condition and then naming exactly what that medical condition was. That's not maintaining confidentiality. Another board member was censured for responding to and having a post on their social media account relaying a discipline incident that took place at the local high school that identified the student's grade, identified the school and the student's gender, and specific details about the incident and the length of the suspension that was imposed by the student. Again, that's not appropriate. That may be information that you receive as your role as a superintendent, but that's not information for public consumption. Lastly, sometimes you will receive emails from the superintendent with updates or daily reports. Well, one board member decided this would be a great idea. They forwarded that email to a member of the public. So again, not maintaining confidentiality there. Number 8, I will vote to appoint the best qualified people after consideration of the recommendation of the superintendent. Okay, this means you have to consider the superintendent's recommendation. That does not mean it's a blank check. If you are going to go against the recommendation, you have to have a valid reason for doing so. Basically, the standard is your decision to not go in conjunction with the superintendent's recommendation. It can't be arbitrary, capricious, or unreasonable. And it also can't be discriminatory or for other illegal reasons. 9. This is one we see a lot, especially within the last 2 years. Supporting and protecting school personnel in the proper performance of their duties. This includes the superintendent and the assistant superintendents. They are employees of the district. So here's an example. A board member violated this provision by sending a letter to the superintendent, for whatever reason, copying the State Board of Education and the Executive County Superintendent, and blatantly accusing the superintendent of allowing employees to violate board policy. That's not supporting district personnel. Another way, a board member violated this by sending an email, copying the business administrator and all other board members, and demanding an accounting of the superintendent's personal leave. Again, that's not supporting district personnel. But another way is, this one actually violated numerous provisions. During a board meeting, a couple of board members came down off the dais, walked out into the crowd, approached the principal of a building to start discussing with the principal whether or not they would like to be the superintendent of the district, and proceeded to offer the person the job. The only problem was the superintendent was sitting on the dais watching all of this happen. So that's not supporting district personnel. That was in fact undermining the existing superintendent in his proper performance of his duties. Lastly, number 10, I will proceed through the proper channels, and that means to refer all complaints to the superintendent and to only act on complaints at public meetings after the failure of administrative remedies. As members of the board, you will be approached by members of the community because you are their elected representative. They will bring any issues to your attention. As a board member, it is your ethical obligation to either bring the complaints that are brought to you to the superintendent, or to refer that individual to the superintendent directly, because it is their job to respond to those complaints and investigate those complaints. It's not the board member's job to investigate and try to address them. And you see here, for example, a board member violated this by deciding to go to the principal directly in connection with a complaint that they received in the local supermarket, instead of going to the superintendent. This board member also piled on by going into the guidance office and demanding copies of SAT reports with student names, and then went and inspected the locker rooms again. Again, you can see how this exceeds the authority of a board member. One of the ones that's also come up recently is board members are not permitted to meet with local association officials about district business without the knowledge and presence of the superintendent being present. So in this instance, the board president and the vice president decided on their own to go have a sit down with the local association to, quote, hear what was really going on and happening in the schools. The Ethics Commission came down very, very hard on this and found that by meeting with the association officials without notifying the superintendent or having the superintendent present, did not limit actions to policy planning and appraisal, turned out to be administering the schools. They were not supporting district personnel, and it's not taking complaints through the proper channels. The board members were both suspended and censored, and the only reason why the second one was not suspended was because she had only been voted into office 1 month prior. So again, if you receive complaints, please refer them to the superintendent. So those are the 10 provisions of the Ethics Act itself. So what I also like to do real quickly is kind of go through some of the conflict provisions. Those of you that have been on the board know that each year I put together a conflict chart for you, kind of laying out what you can do, what you can't do. And that is all based on the definitions in the Ethics Act as to a member of immediate family and or definitions of a relative. Simply put, if you have a relative or an immediate family member that works in the district, there are certain things and votes you cannot be a part of. If you have a relative or immediate family that works in another district, there may still be some items that you cannot be a part of. So that's why I sit with each one of you each year, we go through the chart, and I make sure that we have the accurate information. I give this to you as a reference in terms of the definition as to what is immediate family member, what is considered relative. You can see the definitions are pretty expansive, so please don't feel I'm being intrusive in going into your family history, because the reason why is you see just on this chart, if you have an immediate family member, there's conflicts. If you have a relative in district, there's conflicts. We have this category of other, which thankfully has now been defined, and we know who and what an other is. Again, I indicate that on the chart for you on the prior slide. So there's conflicts if you have relatives or immediate family members that work in the district. Well, there are now, within the last 10 years, an explosion of these staffing companies. Nowadays, we cannot get substitutes, but if you had a relative that worked for a staffing company, it does not create a conflict for you as a board member if your relative or immediate family member works in the school district here or where you serve on the board. Conversely though, if you have a relative or immediate family member that is hired as a long-term sub directly by the district, that could cause a problem and a conflict. If you are in a non-traditional union, AFL-CIO, Teamsters, that will not present a conflict at all for you on the Board of Education, as there is generally no correlation between like CWA contracts and contracts that are entered into by school boards. I mentioned before that the Ethics Commission does not condone or support board members being involved in the interview process, with the sole exception being the position of superintendent. Volunteering, this was a very, very hot topic for a while. It seems to have finally cooled down. The Ethics Commission inexplicably decided a couple of years ago that they were going to try to curb all volunteering by school board members. They quickly realized how big of a misstep that was, because you are volunteering your time here. You're actively involved in situations in your districts, so they had to walk it back. They just made it clear that they don't want board members supervising students or giving directives to staff. So they're really looking at that degree of involvement. If you are going to be volunteering in the district, the safest bet is to let the superintendent know, so that it is very clearly articulated that you are there as a volunteer and not as a board member. I've gone through the cases. Yes, there were, ridiculous as it sounds, there's cases that had to outline what type of volunteering activities were okay. Helping out with the school play, loading band equipment, basically being a band team manager, serving as a team parent, serving as a homeroom or classroom parent, parent coordinator, coordinator for events, coordinator for field days, being a PTO, PTA executive officer. All of those are permissible, as is being actively involved in a local education association and a myriad of other types of activities. I just give these kind of as examples because there are actually cases that clarified these provisions. We are required each year to have just a quick discussion about the doctrine of necessity. I can tell you I've had the pleasure of working with this district since 2011. We have never had to invoke it. All the doctrine of necessity is an instance where there's so many conflicts on the Board of Ed that there's not enough votes that people that can vote that could pass the resolution. So when that limited circumstance happens, there's a couple of steps that we can take in order to make sure that the board is still able to act. The Ethics Commission within the last couple of years has also come down on what I've termed to be the lone wolf, and that would be the board member that is not happy. We are a group, we operate as a group, and majority rules. And sometimes we don't always agree, sometimes we disagree. And then the question is, what do you do when your side doesn't prevail? Well, one board member decided that they were going to go file a lawsuit against the board to try to block the action. And not only was that lawsuit dismissed, but the board member that filed that action against his fellow board members was disciplined by the School Ethics Commission, because they basically made it clear, you're part of a team. Your remedy, if you don't prevail, is not to run to court and bring action against your fellow board members. It's rather to try to work together here in the setting to reach a common resolution. Within the last year, we've also seen, when I say the last year, it's the last year and a half because of the COVID situation, the Ethics Commission has been a little delayed in getting out some of their decisions. So the long-standing rule with respect to letters to the editor was that a board member has a First Amendment right, the same as any other citizen. They could write a letter to the editor as long as it was factual, and as long as they indicate that they are speaking for themselves and not speaking on behalf of the Board of Ed. That's been the long-standing rule for over 15 years. Well, last year, a decision was issued where a board member was found to have gone a step too far. What happened in this case was a board member wrote an op-ed piece attacking a fellow board member who was running for re-election. The board member put in there that, well, I'm writing this as this is my own opinion, I'm not speaking for the board, but then he proceeded to list all of his accomplishments as a board member. That was found to be a disingenuous disclaimer. And so the Ethics Commission came down kind of hard on that board member. If you are thinking about doing anything like that, please reach out to me. I'm here as a resource to help you. I can help put the requisite language in so that you don't run afoul of any of this. And lastly, the bane of my existence, I can't stand it, social media. So there have been increasing cases involving social media and board members. I mentioned it a little bit before that a board member was censured where they decided to put out on social media a student discipline incident. Well, that's kind of obvious that you would see how that could be a problem. In addition, more recently, 2 other board members decided to launch into an online attack against a former substitute who was running for the board. They put out fake information, false information, about this person, indicating that when they were a substitute in the district, they engaged in misconduct and they were subsequently fired. Again, that was no basis in fact. It was found to have divulged incorrect information, and the Ethics Commission came down on both of those members. Really kind of pushing the envelope here, and this gets back to what I started with at the beginning, is when does the board member's hat come off? Last year, the Ethics Commission found a board member was in violation of the act when he decided to post on his personal Facebook page comments that were anti-Muslim. Okay, it was on his personal Facebook page, not made in capacity as a board member, and the content were clearly personal opinions. Nevertheless, because of what I said at the very beginning, you're up here to uphold the public trust and to conduct yourselves to the best educational welfare of students regardless of race, color, creed, religion. The Ethics Commission came down and censured and only didn't remove the member because he had decided not to run for re-election. So the lesson here, at least from last year, is be very careful with what you post. Because there is a paper trail, and really they are looking at you as board members almost 24/7. So it's just something to be very careful with. My contact information is there for you. My phone number, my office phone number is there for you, and I'm always happy to answer any questions.
Thank you.
Oh, I had a question.
Oh, Mr. Messier, yes.
So when, there was a slide, there was a couple of slides up there, and it talked about if you were writing a letter to the newspaper.
Okay.
And all the examples mentioned that you were a board member.
Uh-huh.
What about if I write a letter to the newspaper? I write this whole negative, not negative, the truth, thing about Fillmore complaint or government or something like that. And all I put on there is Michael Messenger, Fall River, New Jersey. I never say anything that I'm on the Board of Ed. That allowed?
What I would say is, I would say if it is a topic that is not related to the school, the operations of
Now,
the
let's
school.
say I told Fillmore, if you cut education funding, I can't stand that.
What I would say is, in that respect, I would just say that I would identify yourself as a board member and note that you are speaking for yourself. The opinions expressed in this letter to the editor are yours and not that of the Board of Ed. That's just the cleanest and safest way to do it.
Michael, I think the safest way to do that is to sign it Mark Toscano.
Thank you. Any other questions? Okay.
Just want to thank Marianne Musich, who's here tonight, the Deputy Mayor of Manalapan, who came out to support Mrs. Bruno on her election to the board. Thank you, Marianne.
Hi, Mayor. Thank you
Always
for coming.
appreciate you coming out.
We go into closed session now. Can I have a motion to go into closed session?
Motion.
Second.
Motion by Mr. Parisi, seconded by Mrs. Lavin, second that. Good evening, everybody. Ready to start. Pursuant to the Open Public Meetings Act, Chapter 231, Public Law of 1975, this meeting was noticed, was sent to the Asbury Park Press on October 12, 2021, and has been duly advertised in the Asbury Park Press issue of October 14, 2021. All municipal clerks of the townships and the boroughs within the regional high school districts have been duly notified, and the requirements of the posting of the notices have been met on October 12, 2021. Would you please join me? Stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Mr. Scott, do you have any changes to the executive agenda?
Yes, Mr. Bruno. In addition to the items that were noted on the agenda that was printed prior, last Friday, the board also discussed an executive session under exception number 3, staff and student health issues, as well as student discipline issues.
Okay. May I have a motion to approve C1 through C6? Mrs. Castellello?
Capiello?
May I have a second?
Second.
Second, Mrs. Lavin. Any discussion? Not hearing any discussion, roll call, please.
Mrs. Capiello?
Yes.
It was a yes.
Yes.
Mrs. Lavin?
Yes.
Mr. Messinger?
Yes.
Mrs. Spinelli?
Yes.
Mrs. Bruno?
Yes.
Mr. Parisi?
Yes.
Mr. Bruno?
Yes.
Motion carries.
May I have a motion to approve December 9th, regular meeting? I need a motion.
Motion. Second.
Mrs. Lavin, second, Mrs. Capiello. Any discussion? No discussion, roll call, please.
Mrs. Capiello?
Yes.
Mrs. Lavin?
Yes.
Mr. Messinger?
Yes.
Mrs. Spinelli?
Yes.
Mrs. Bruno?
Abstain.
Mr. Parisi?
Yes.
Mr. Bruno?
Yes.
Motion carries.
All communications are on file with the board secretary in his office. And we're going to have Dr. Sampson's superintendent report. Dr. Sampson?
Thank you, Mr. Bruno. First and foremost, welcome to Mrs. Bruno to the Freehold Regional Board of Education. Congratulations, Mr. Bruno, on your election as president, and congratulations to Mr. Felicia on your election as vice president. I'm very thankful to work alongside this Board of Education. I think it's the best place. It's one of the greatest places a superintendent can be. So thank you.
Thank you.
Just a couple updates. You know, obviously, I want to start by just thanking and recognizing the absolute amazing work of the entire school community. You know, and it started over winter break. You know, when we very early on and made the decision that you know, this district is going to be open. It's going to be open for full days, and that our students need us to be open for school days. But what that necessitated, obviously, doing it safely. You know, obviously, there's a COVID surge with the new variant, and really from December 28th or 29th on over the winter break, a lot of folks really worked their tails off night and day to make sure that we were able to open up. You know, this past week, you know, we were down a significant number of faculty and staff who were in quarantine. I'll get to my thoughts on the quarantine guidelines in a moment. But that put a lot of pressure on everyone else within the organization to make this place run to the same degree that, you know, we've come to expect for kids. And from faculty and staff, the teaching staff, the custodial staff, the buildings and ground staff, the administrative team that worked their tails off over the break, all the way through the teachers that are covering extra classes. It's been an all hands on deck this past week, and you know, this organization has risen to the challenge to continue to serve these students. And you know, we can't talk out of both sides of our mouths as educators. We cannot sit there and say our students are in crisis. We're seeing an explosion of mental health needs. We're seeing real struggles academically. We can't, in good conscience, say that and then modify our days for them. We just can't, right? And so that drives us, because if we know. And the Wall Street Journal had a terrific article on even the impact of short-term closures on students' mental and physical health. It's pretty clear. And you know, the European nations, one of the things that they did differently than the United States was they sort of worked from the rest of the world shut down and schools stayed open. In America, we closed the schools down and opened everything else up, right? So it's like, where are our priorities, right? And so, you know, it's important to us to stay open for children, and I'm not casting aspersions on any other districts that have had to go to remote. There's a unique context to every single one of those decisions. But what I am saying is, if we really believe that we want our children to come out of the impact of this quarantine over the past couple of years now, then it's incumbent on us to do everything in our power to keep these schools humming as they have, safely. And I think that's what we've done. I'm thankful to the folks in this organization. It was a real strain on a lot of people the past couple of weeks. A real strain, like a breaking strain to folks. So I'm thankful. You know, we were hopeful before the break to begin to move to a test to stay, and we had lobbied the state and lobbied the state and lobbied the state for months on, you know, come up with a framework, because what we've seen for 2 years now, because we have 2 years of data at this point, basically, what we've seen are, when you get outside of 4 or 5 days after exposure, students are not popping positive. 99.99% aren't, right? We know that. And so we're pushing the state to develop a test to stay program. The CDC comes out with new quarantine guidance in the midst of all this over break. You know, the NJDOH was silent to it initially, and then the guidance that comes out on the Test to Stay program, where the CDC says, test a child 2 times first day, and then within day 7, and if they're negative, they stay in school. The NJDOH says, test an exposed child potentially every other day for the duration of the quarantine, which could be 14 days. So if anybody in this room can tell me how we're finding 7 tests in 14 days when we can't even get 1 test now for folks, I'm all ears. And so the absolute detachment from the NJDOH and the absolute silence of the New Jersey Department of Ed in all this is not just embarrassing, it's actually a dereliction of duty in terms of what they're supposed to do. And I've been very public about that and very disappointed. And the other piece I will point to is we have clear guidance from the governor on when we are or are not allowed to transition to remote learning. Many parents have requested remote learning. We believe that overall, there are certain circumstances where that might work, but overall, remote is a bad thing for a large number of students, right? However, there is no remote learning. You're not allowed to transition to remote learning. You're not allowed to offer it in New Jersey, yet several districts are. With no consequences from the Department of Ed, no consequences from any of the state level bodies. And if you follow the thread on some of those districts, it actually gets even more interesting. That's all I'm going to say about that. What I will come back to is we're moving into a phase, if this surge continues over the next couple of weeks, it will be anarchy across the state. Every single district will make up their own rules, because some already are, with no repercussions. The Freehold Regional High School District, we follow the rules, right? We follow the path that's allowable. We're not necessarily going rogue. It will be interesting to me to see even a modicum of leadership from any one of those 2 organizations that I mentioned. I will continue to say the rate of transmission in schools is at a minimum 6 or 7 times lower than the rate of transmission across the state. Schools, by and large, are one of the safest places to be. And we're gonna continue with that premise and keep the schools open here, because we have seen a profound impact. We have seen a sharp increase in significant disciplinary infractions. We have seen a sharp increase in suicide ideations. We've seen a sharp increase in students in the 9th grade exhibiting behaviors that are more akin to a 6th or 7th grader, just across the board, right? And so taking all that into consideration, we're going to continue to push to just keep schools open regardless. Try and keep this as normal as possible. Our winter sports are still off and running. We have no plans to shut any of that down. And we'll see where we go over the next couple of weeks. We're very we're excited that we know on Monday a large number of our staff, between Friday and Monday, tomorrow and Monday, are coming off of quarantine, which should bolster what we're trying to do in the schools and hopefully take some of the pressure off the other individuals who've really been juggling, and we get back to even I won't say normal because it's not normal, but a sense of normalcy for children. So
what testing are we doing?
So
who are we following?
So we're going to ultimately follow the CDC.
We are.
And we're working with one of our local health officials now, a group of us, myself, several of the K-8 superintendents, working with one of our health officials to develop those protocols, obviously post-surge.
But everybody's excited about the test this day.
I think folks are excited at the prospect of a manageable and effective test to stay. I don't think a single school leader in the state of New Jersey is excited about the framework that the New Jersey Department of Health put out.
Thank you for clarifying.
Can I ask a question?
Sure.
This is switching gears. So I had seen 2 days ago the President of the United States was talking about school, and he said that they sent $130 billion to the states to keep schools open and keep students safe. And I was just wanted to know how much of that did Freehold Regional receive from the federal government?
Gotcha. Good question, Mr. Messenger. So a couple things first. I do believe that New Jersey is the only state in the union that continued to implement a state aid reduction for some districts during the COVID crisis. And so for the Freehold Regional High School District, in what's known as ESSER 1, 2, and 3, which are the federal funds that came in different time frames, it's basically, think of it as a 3-year window. And so over that 3-year window, we'll have a total of $9.9 billion federal funds. Over that same period of time, I believe we're losing $17 million from S2. So COVID, this is the truth, right? From a financial standpoint only, COVID has saved this district because that $9 million wouldn't have been there to buffer what is ultimately a $30 million draw, or $29 million drawdown, which would have resulted in us cutting dozens and dozens of staff members over the next couple of years, which we now do not have to do. Couple that with the passage of the referendum, right, which really saved us on some of the critical infrastructure needs to the tune of almost $15 million. So you take that $15 million referendum on our critical infrastructure, you take the $9.9 billion in the federal dollars over a 3-year window, and Sean, correct me if I'm missing anything here, but I don't think I am. You take that $9.9 million over a 3-year window, and we still don't break even from what we are being reduced by the state of New Jersey. The other piece to that is, and I was involved with this group early on, but it did not apply to us ultimately. The Education Law Center had a various group of stakeholders really emanating out of Jersey City that fought S2, especially in this environment. They prevailed, but where they prevailed was the federal government said, you're not getting these federal dollars if you're going to reduce districts that have a certain percentage of poverty rate. We don't meet that criteria, although last I checked, our kids matter too. And so New Jersey has continued with S2. I'm not sure if there'll be a change in oh, and I should mention, we also received over $1 million in adjustment aid or emergency aid from the drawdown, which we applied for this past year, and it still doesn't come close to what we're losing. We're still to the negative several $million. But it allows us to tread water over the next couple of years. But what happens over that 3-year window when those federal dollars go away and the referendum work takes place over the next 2 years, and then we have all of our ongoing long-term needs that continue to build up, and we don't have those federal dollars, this district will face a fiscal cliff if something doesn't change with S2. I'm hopeful that some of our local legislators obviously are keenly aware of this concern. We'll continue to advocate for change to S2 and how it's implemented. Sean and I have provided elected officials numerous suggestions on how to make that, how to lessen the severity of it on districts and the impact. Obviously, the president of the Senate is changing, and he was the largest advocate for S2, so there may be some change there. I don't know. I'm not sure, where the governor stands on it, who's here for another 4 years. We're going to continue to advocate, but so that's the financial bucket in a nutshell. Sean, I miss anything?
No, I think that the scale of the two, 10 million roughly in COVID-related federal funding versus $30 million in loss of state aid. And the other important thing to remember is that loss of state aid is compounded, right? So what we lose this year, we again lose next year plus an additional layer, and it's over 7 years, and we're 4 years in on that. So the overall impact is far greater than.
Thank you. Board reports tonight, we have one, curriculum and instruction. Mike Messenger from Marlboro will do that presentation tonight.
All right, thank you very much. It was a very fact-filled meeting this evening. There were 6 different subjects on the agenda. With respect to curriculum writing for this school year, the 2 core areas of focus will be health and phys ed and world languages. And the whole program from grades 9 through 12 will be done. So we discussed how there's enhanced implementation of curriculum. So after, curriculum's written, it's implemented, and after the first year of the curriculum being taught, the team gets back together to see how the curriculum was taught. It wasn't set it and forget it. So these things are constantly updated. And just to remind everybody, with respect to languages, there's essentially 3 primary languages taught here: Spanish, Italian, and Latin. There's some Mandarin in Marlboro, and then there's 1 or 2 high schools that have French, but French is being phased out because it went by the wayside in all the K through 8 sending districts. Second subject was 2021-2022 school goals, and this is all about benchmark assessments. So we heard about how students take tests online, and then the teachers take that data and analyze it. Department supervisors also take this test data, they analyze all the questions, they'll see how students did for each and every question, and of course the administrators will see how the questions are aligned to curriculum. And for instance, if one of the classes or one teacher's kids did better on a particular question, it'll be studied as to what this teacher is doing differently than other teachers as to why her kids did better on a particular question. Issue number 3 with the magnet programs, I believe performing arts auditions are occurring this week. ROTC interviews next week. The administration is actually examining on how to potentially expand the programs because we have a lot more qualified kids than there are openings at the magnet programs. Top 3 programs in terms of demonstrated interest: business administration, computer science, law and public service, and that was that for the magnet program portion of the meeting. With respect to career pathways, of course, this all started back in 2015 when we got a grant, and that grant expires in 5 years, so it expired in 2021. Of course, we have web design at Freehold Borough. That program is running with 3 cohorts. So we saw a layout of the distribution of the students in both web design and the other career pathway health professionals. Next year, we're looking for 220 students in web design, split among Borough, Freehold Township, and Marlboro. We're looking for 210 students to be enrolled in health professions next year. That is split between Manalapan and Borough. With respect to health professions, the collaboration with Central State continues there. We heard about all the good things that are transpiring both now and in the future. Many people know that Central State got acquired by a larger company, so that should benefit the program. And we also heard that just recently, as a practical application here, Applewood Estates recently came to Borough to discuss career opportunities. And that was not just in health, but it was also taking into consideration culinary students too. Subject number 5 is learning assessments from the state of New Jersey for 2022. We're moving ahead in the spring with assessments. The freshmen, English and math, that'll be April 25th through June 3rd. Juniors will be taking graduation proficiency assessment. That's the week of March 14th. And then the juniors also have to take a science test. April 25th through June 3rd will be the time frame of that. But the science test has no impact on graduation. Those English and math assessments, freshmen have to sit for them if they want to have more options for meeting graduation requirements. And with respect to the assessments that we're given in the fall here, at our next meeting, Dr. Sampson is going to present some data on those assessments called Start Strong. And then to wrap it up, the last subject was the Summer Academy. And let me just say, before I get to Summer Academy, we found out that the district is going to offer a free SAT prep class in February, so that's good. But if we move forward to 2022, the administration is getting ready for that. Classes are going to start right after July 4th, and they're actually looking into, with respect to original credit, whether they can offer a class virtually and in person. You have to choose either one. And the class virtually will be, every morning at 8 o'clock. It's not like you can go back 24 hours a day and watch it on tape. Because this past year in 2021, we actually had kids traveling on vacation since it's the summer. They were able to take classes, and we also had international students. So it's really being looked at whether we can actually have a teacher teaching online and then one teaching in person. So that basically is what transpired earlier tonight, everybody.
Thank you so much.
Excellent.
There is no public participation tonight. So, Mr. Boyce, is there any changes to the agenda?
There are, in addition to the addendum in the back of the room, there are 2 changes. The first is on H3, approval of appointments. Board, if you can remove Taylor Payne from consideration, is on that list, so strike that from your agenda. And also H7, approval of leaves of absence. The first item, Rebecca Aronson. There needs to be a change of date in there, and I'll read through. Rebecca Aronson, school counselor, Freehold Township High School, leave of absence without pay in accordance with the New Jersey Family Leave Act, effective, and it should read May 11th, 2022 through June 30th, 2022. The remainder is the same, using sick time from March 16th, 2022 through May 10th, 2022. So with those 2 changes, Mr. Brady.
That's all we have?
That's it.
Okay. We're going to take H1 through H11. This is personnel and negotiations, H1 through H11. May I have a motion?
Moved.
Mr. Parisi, may I have a second?
Second.
Mrs. Glavin, thank you. Any discussion? Any discussion? Roll call, please.
Mrs. Capiello,
Yes.
Mrs. Lavin,
Yes.
Mr. Messinger,
Yes.
Mrs. Finelli,
Yes.
Mrs. Bruno,
Yes.
Mr. Parisi,
Yes.
Mr. Bruno.
Yes.
Motion's carried.
Okay. Programmed operations, building, transportation, and physical plant, L1 through L3.
That's
Aye.
I.
sir.
I3. I need a motion.
Move.
Ms. Capiello?
May I have a second?
Second.
Any discussion? Roll call, please.
Mrs. Capiello,
Yes.
Mrs. Lavin,
Yes.
Mr. Messinger,
Yes.
Mrs. Finelli,
Yes.
Mrs. Bruno,
Yes.
Mr. Parisi,
Yes.
Mr. Bruno.
Yes.
Motion's carried.
Okay, educational programs and administration, K1 through L2. Educational programs and administration, K1 through L2. May I have a motion?
Motion.
Mr. Parisi.
May I have a second?
Third level behind.
May I have a second?
Second.
Okay.
Mrs. Capiello.
Any discussion? Roll call, please.
Mrs. Capiello,
Yes on everything except L1. I abstain on Dr. Sampson.
Mrs. Lavin,
Yes.
Mr. Messinger,
Yes.
Mrs. Finelli,
Yes.
Mrs. Bruno,
Yes.
Mr. Parisi,
Yes.
Mr. Bruno.
Yes, but I abstain from L1. Dr. Sampson?
Motion's carried.
Thank you. Any old business? Board members, any old business? Any new business?
Mr. Bruno, if I may?
Yes, go ahead.
Okay. First, I want to just congratulate Mr. Bruno on your reelection and on being board president this year. I want to welcome
Thank you.
Mrs. Jamie Bruno from Manalapan to the board. When I joined the board in 2020, had the privilege of serving with Mrs. Jen Satara for a short period of time before she passed away. So I always looked up to her. She was a bit of a long-time giant on the board. So you do follow in some big shoes, and I'm sure you're going to do a great job. And I look forward to working with you. And Heshi, who's in Florida, enjoying himself. I do want to say that the governor, so as some of you may know, some of you may not know, I have been the New Jersey School Board Association representative on the board in the past. I guess we'll have to discuss about maybe passing a resolution to renew that this year. But in any event, I try to share some news about New Jersey School Board Association for Mrs. Bruno, since you're new. So the governor passed a proclamation in December declaring that January 2020 was going to be School Board Recognition Month. So I just want to share something personal to everybody. I want to thank all my board members for serving their communities. You give a lot of time, and energy and commitment from your personal lives towards serving your communities in this Board of Ed. And I extend that to all of the 8 sending districts that send students into Freehold Regional, and all those board members as well. Just want to recognize their time and commitment towards serving our public schools, who year in and year out are always ranked in the top of the nation. I mean, you can just look through the data. New Jersey's always up there, top 3, top 5, year in and year out. And that's, we owe a lot to the members of the community that serve on their boards of eds. So I just wanted to thank everybody that's on this board here with us. And then the last thing is that the County School Board Association meeting is going to be on Monday, February 7th. I believe it's going to be at the Colts Neck Inn again. So if anybody's interested in attending that County School Board meeting on Monday, February 7th, I'll email over some information on it. And that's all I have today. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you. Thank you.
Mr. Parisi, I thought that was a virtual one, no?
The one on the 7th?
Is it?
I'll double check. I'll forward the information.
Okay.
Yeah.
Any more new business? Any other new business? Okay. Not hearing any new business, we're going to have an adjournment. May I have a motion to adjourn?
Motion. Second.
Second.
Capiel.
Meeting to
All in
adjourn.
favor?
All in favor?
Yes. Aye.
I hear 2.
I had.
It gets, you heard 7? Meeting's adjourned.
It's already 7.
At the same time.